Yeah.
I think tragedy is kind of what shapes us, like success or pride can be like, it only makes us happy, it's not like, or, well, it can bring pressure, but, it's mostly like a good feeling, but tragedy can kind of bring out like maturity almost, and it's like growth in a way.
Yeah, because tragedy is the thing through which we grow, absolutely. Like when you win something, it's very difficult to grow through winning, you know? Like if you win, it's kind of like, what do you, so like let's say you're on a football team and you win on Friday, what do you do next Friday? The same thing you did this Friday. You know, a lot of times there isn't some development, at least, obviously you can look at it and say, well, there is room for development, there's room for growth. Well, it's difficult to do that because you're always like, well, the goal is to win. I'm already winning, so why not just keep doing what I'm doing? It's very difficult to motivate yourself to find those small things that need improvement and then to continue to improve on them. You know? It's almost like you need something really bad to happen, something catastrophic for you to realize, oh no, I need to turn this around. You know? Last page. So we're talking about tragedy. What are some things in life that are tragic? When we use that word, what do we mean? What are some examples of tragic things in life?
Family member passes away.
So someone passes away, someone dies. We'll say death. What else might be tragic?
Getting like injured to the point where you can't walk anymore.
Sorry, injured. Disabled. Yeah.
Like being financially low, or like something happening that cuts out your, like a job loss.
You put financial ruin.
Yeah.
In other words, it isn't just like, you know, you're born poor and you are poor, but something happens, like you're doing fine, you're doing well, and all of a sudden something happens that turns it around. And so now it's, you know, yeah. Others? Yeah. Well, parents divorcing. Not bad. Oh, so we over here, death of other, because obviously if you die, it's a different category perhaps. Yeah. If you died, you'd be happy? You wouldn't be anything.
Huh?
You wouldn't be anything, you'd just be gone. So we have death, injury, financial ruin, parents divorcing. And we can probably put all these under tragedy. Yeah, I agree with that. How can you grow from the death of somebody else?
You learn to live without.
You learn to live without them. How's that growth though?
I have no idea.
You're not wrong, but yeah.
It helps you move on, or like learn to move on.
Yeah, so maybe from because of that, you learn to move on. Okay, we'll take that. So you lose someone close to you and you learn how to move on. I wonder if this has ever happened to any of you guys. I know I've had students who this has happened to them, where they've lost their mom or their dad, they lost someone close to them. And they kind of reoriented their lives because they were thinking, well, I know that my mom would want me to do these things in life. So they start to live their life kind of on that, like through that lens of, this is what my mom would want for me, so I owe it to her to do better, to do well, or to do whatever. And so, yeah, you can learn to move on. It can also maybe help to motivate you to do better because you want to make that person proud if they're still around. How about like an injury or a disability? How can you grow from that? Yeah.
You develop skills that don't require the injured parts of you.
So, can you think of an example of something like that?
Well, like, I guess if you're really good at sports and you get injured, you can develop, like if you wanted to go in business instead, you wanted to try sports, I guess.
No, that's good. And you did, remember the paintings we were talking about last week? One of them was from Diego Rivera, and we mentioned Frida Kahlo. And Frida was married to Diego Rivera, and she's probably more famous than he is today. There's a movie about her a few years ago, and she was a painter and all those things. And apparently she was just a real like hellion when she was younger. Got in a lot of trouble. It's how her and Diego Rivera actually met initially. They didn't realize they met that way, but it was years that she was still in high school. Diego Rivera was commissioned to paint at her school, to paint I think it was a mural, if I'm not mistaken, at her high school. And so she thought it was funny because every morning this painter would like lug all of his paint and all of his stuff up the stairs to go to the top floor so he could paint. So she thought it was funny to put oil on the stairs one day, so that while he was going up, he would slip and fall and break his shit. And he did. He was going up there, he slipped, he fell, he messed himself up. She thought that was hilarious, and she got in trouble for doing it. Later on, she ended up marrying him. She just didn't realize it at the time, of course. But what got her to become an artist, and which is interesting because then art became a passion of her life, which is how she ended up falling in love with Diego Rivera, because he was a painter, he was an artist. If this following event hadn't happened to her, she never would have fallen in love with him. She never would have become an artist herself. She never would have fallen in love with him, and her life would have been incredibly different from what it was. One day, I don't remember the exact details of it all, so if I'm off by a little bit, forgive me. And if you know it, tell me. But she was in a car accident where I think it was a trolley car, somehow hit her car, and she was pinned into the car. She couldn't move. And the way that she was pinned into it, there was a steel beam that was coming out of the trolley car, but the trolley hadn't stopped yet. It was still kind of slowly pushing, like slowly. And there was a metal rod that was coming out of the trolley that had jammed into her hip. So while the trolley was still going slowly, the metal rod was piercing through her hip. And they couldn't do anything about it, because they couldn't. It had to stop the trolley, back the trolley. You can imagine the incredible. Imagine someone taking a metal pole, like a spike, and driving it through your hip one side out the other. Because of that, she wasn't able to walk afterwards. She was in bed for months and months and months trying to heal and recover from it. And it was during that time that her dad brought her some canvas and some paints because she was incredibly depressed, obviously. She was thinking about killing herself. And so her dad brought her these paints and said, try painting or whatever. Do something that you can do while you're laying in bed. And so she had like a little canvas that they could set up on her bed, and she started painting. It was because of that she fell in love with painting. And that one event, which in her mind at the time, was the worst thing that ever happened to her. And it might have been the worst thing that ever happened to her. Who knows? Because who knows what her life would have been like if that hadn't happened to her. But it did. And so because that happened to her, she developed that one skill, and that skill led to a passion, which then had her at the center of even world art history and world politics. And I mean, if you look at her life, she was involved in so many things. It's incredible how one person lived as much as she did. Her and Diego Rivera both. And then in the process, by the way, two very ugly human beings who prove that there's somebody out there for everybody. I guess if you're talented enough. And so the skill set she wouldn't have had otherwise. There's another guy I'm thinking of who, I'm trying to remember his name. He was written about by Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist. And it was a guy who became quadriplegic. So he was in an accident, and he lost the ability to move his arms and legs. And I'm trying to remember the guy's name, and I can find it, but he's still alive today. Because of that, he wanted to kill himself, but he just wasn't able to. He didn't have the ability. And so he figured, well, since he can't do that, he has to try to figure out, did this happen to me for a reason? And just by asking that one simple question, it got him started on a life where he ends up getting a PhD in psychology. He becomes a therapist and a motivational speaker, something that, according to him, never would have even occurred to him as a possibility in his life. He never would have thought, oh, I'll become a therapist, I'll become a PhD. A lot of people, that would never even occur to you until it has to. So yeah, there's some times in life where an injury or a disability, something like that, you can turn it around. The idea is that all of these things here, maybe even this one, to an extent you can control this one. But you can't control this one. You can't control this one. You can't control this one. Maybe some control. But sometimes things just happen, So the point is that you can't control how any of these things happen to you. But what you can do is control how you respond to it. There are tragedies in life, absolutely. financial ruin. You can learn, it's difficult to think of like an entrepreneur who didn't go through something horrible financially. I mean, Steve Jobs went through it, Bill Gates, all these guys that go through horrible financial situations because very few people get it right the first time. It takes practice, If you think that you're going to start your first company and that one company is going to become the biggest corporation in the world, you're probably crazy. You're probably going to screw up one or two companies before you finally get it right. Because it takes trial and error, especially if you're doing things differently from what everybody else has already done. If you're going to model your business after somebody else and do exactly what they did, you might have some success. But of course, they started a different business at a different time, in a different business climate. So maybe it's not going to work if you follow what they did. Maybe if you model some of it, But if you're looking at saying, I'm going to, make cheeseburgers a completely different way, it's going to take some practice, man. And this might happen before that, so you can develop from there. Parents divorcing, same thing. You can find a way, because you can't control the tragedy from happening. What you can control is how you respond to it. And we can juxtapose tragedy. Sometimes people will talk about like the Holocaust, and they'll say, oh, the Holocaust was a tragedy. I'd suggest to you there's a significant distinction between tragedy and evil. Evil is something completely else. Evil is like mass murder or terrorism or whatever. And so these are different forms. I wouldn't call those tragedy. I guess I would say that. Tragedy are these other kinds of things that just sort of like happen. These are the things that people do. But similarly, you can still respond to them exactly the same way. You can sit in a concentration camp and ask, why me? You can ask it rhetorically, meaning you don't really want an answer to it. You're just kind of like, oh my God, why me? Because you want to complain. And believe me, if you're in a concentration camp, you have a lot to complain about. That isn't a way of saying like, man, you need to get over it. Just like any of these, if a loved one dies, if you're injured, you're disabled, if you experience financial ruin, if your parents are disabled, you could sit there and just be like, why me? Do you have something to complain about? Absolutely. All of these give you a lot to complain, and your complaints are legitimate too. It isn't that you're just being a whiner. If you got tragedy, if you have difficulties in your life, yeah, you've got lots to complain about. The question is, what are you going to do with that? Do you just complain about it? Or do you use that as an opportunity? Because you might say, okay, now my life has gone in this direction, so now I need to make the best of that situation now. And as your life kind of does these things. Because if you make the best of it, a weird thing's going to happen. You're kind of pulling on the reins of your life, and you're going to take it in the direction that you want to take it in. In other words, you're going to be driving it now. You aren't going to be driven by life, but you're going to be driving life. These are the same thing, a loved one doesn't just die, but they're murdered. Terrorism happens. You can list whatever you want to list down this list here. And the truth is that everybody who's alive has something to complain about with these things. And everybody who's alive, your complaints are legitimate. They're true. That's the hard part about it. It's not like we're complaining about stuff we have no reason to complain. Some people complain maybe disproportionate, but who's to say what's disproportionate and what's correct? But the point of the matter is that whatever these things that happen to you, you still have to live your life. No matter, you make a wrong turn, well, you still have to get to where you're going. You can complain about how you made a wrong turn, or you can just go, sometimes people make wrong turns, and you go back to it. And I'm sure you all know people like this, who like to blame people, or like when something goes wrong, they want to find out who's responsible for this, who's to blame. And then we all want to point the finger at the person who's to blame, Or like you're driving down the street and someone tells you make a left, so you make a left, and then you go, oh shit, I meant it right. You could be like, dude, come on, man, get it right. Or you could just say, people misspeak sometimes, And then what do you do there? Well, you're developing something there. You're developing the ability to be more forgiving. And if you're more forgiving of others, there's a good chance you're going to be more forgiving and understanding of yourself, perhaps. So the point of it is just that tragedies do define us, because they help to develop us. Just like practice. Practice doesn't, practice helps to develop you. Game time is a time to show off what you've been practicing. It shows off what you can do. I mean, in a school sense, hopefully tests are like that too. Where you can sit there and go, oh, this is cool, I know this stuff. Let me show off what I know. Or, writing it can be like that as well. Oh, I have some great ideas. Let me show you what I'm thinking of in your writing. You know, whatever that difficulty is. So it shows us what we're made of. Questions? Comments, concerns, complaints, criticisms, critiques?
Neato.